It is almost Christmas, and I have to admit that I would much rather be introducing our Christmas concert at Westminster United, precariously balancing on the edge of the stage because of the massive space requirements of our band and choir. But alas, this is our situation. For those of you who don't know, we usually spend Christmas together at Westminster United, and it is a true Christmas celebration filled with music and fanfare and even the blasts from the pipe organ as we attempt to do our congregational singing. It is weird to long for crowds and cacophony, but that is what so many of us crave right now. I think of the last time Westgate students were in Bethlehem, all of us crowding into the Church of the Nativity, along with a multitude of pilgrims, trying to get a glimpse of that star that marks the precise spot where Jesus popped out. It must be noted that it is incredibly difficult to get our students to make their way down those stairs into the ancient birth chamber. I always have to yell at them to stop being so Canadian as they timidly and politely allow others in the throng to go ahead of them. But eventually, after numerous sorries and excuse me's, we do make it down there. On one of those trips, actually the first one that happened over 25 years ago, we descended into a different cavern with the students. This was Hezekiah's tunnel, a tunnel that winds 800 meters under Jerusalem, said to have been built to supply the city with water in the event of a siege. The tunnel is waist deep in water at times, and it is quite the experience to navigate. If you were to go there now, you would find the tunnel within an archaeological area. But back then, its entrance sat unadorned in the middle of a Jerusalem neighborhood. When we arrived, 3 boys were playing soccer by the entrance. As they saw us, they stood up tall, and one of them said, 50 shekels each to go into the tunnel, and he held out his hand. I was impressed by this financial ingenuity, but I was not going to part with my money and fall for this scam. I was feeling like the seasoned traveler who knew what was really going on. Oh, how wrong I was. We passed the boys dismissively, lit our candles, this was long before LED headlamps, and entered the tunnel. Because I am slightly claustrophobic, I thought the wise thing to do was to be at the end of our line. Oh, how wrong I was. As we descended into the dark, there was a gust of wind and all the candles suddenly blew out. Our train of students came to an abrupt halt as the leaders couldn't see a thing, and we were already knee-deep in water. We all slammed into one another. I was trapped at the end of the line, and I slapped into our fearless leader, Bob Hummelt. None of us could see. I could only hear the futile attempts ahead of me as the students tried to relight the candles. It was at this point that the soccer boys thought it would be fun to get back at those would-be savvy travelers, and they began to throw rocks at us. As the rocks pinged off the sides of the cavernous space, and as I screamed, "Ow, get going, they're throwing rocks," what I remember most was the sound of Bob's laughter, enjoying the predicament we were in, and enjoying the fact that I was taking the brunt of most of the stones. In fact, he still laughs whenever I bring this up. But believe it or not, that brings us to Christmas. You see, my favorite Christmas story is not about the shepherds in Luke or the wise ones in Matthew. It is about the silent word pleading in John. For there we read that the light shines in the darkness, that no gust of wind will blow out our candles, no storm will smother the light of God. Hezekiah's tunnel reminds me that with God, things are different. The light of God is not extinguishable. Christmas convinces me every year that nothing can separate us from the love of God found in the Word that was made flesh, and that God is still dwelling among us. It is essential to name that fact throughout this time when we feel so separate from one another. God's light is still here. The darkness cannot overcome it. So as you listen to the words and music in this Christmas video, try to see God's light that shines despite everything that attempts to extinguish it. We're excited to share the spirit of Christmas with you in this form, in the hope that we will all be together in person next year. I wish you a safe and meaningful Christmas. God keep all of you.
In 2017, my family traveled to Jerusalem and lived there for the months of January and February. This means that we were there for many of the Christmas celebrations. Although Christmas is supposed to be a peaceful time, there is still lots of conflict going on, and that was clearly noticeable. I remember when we were going for a walk to Manger Square in Bethlehem, there were soldiers patrolling the area. This is a usual thing in the Middle East for the military to be a regular presence, but it shocked me, and I wondered how a celebration of peace could be overshadowed by conflict between two nations. For the next few days, we spent time walking around and exploring the old city of Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Bethlehem and Jerusalem are separated by a 25-foot wall, which is covered in graffiti. I remember a specific piece of graffiti which stood out, which was a Christmas tree surrounded by a wall. This was often a common idea in Palestine, and I found several wood carvings of the exact same scene in a few local stores. This is representing the conflict and how Bethlehem, which is the setting of the Christmas story, is under oppression. I saw the people who live there still celebrating and trying to be peaceful even among the conflict. I thought this is especially relevant today, as we are looking at a Christmas that is definitely not normal. I think that we can learn from the places like the Middle East and try to make this Christmas still a celebration of peace.
Christmas story? Yes, I have an easy choice for a Christmas story. In fact, the Grace Christmas story very much leads to the idea that the highest joys follow from the darkest valleys. And one more note, please. The circle does eventually come back to Christmas, so be patient. The story starts with a very cute 9-month-old Kenyan baby boy, whom my parents and my wife's parents both told us we had to meet. They knew we were looking to adopt. Long story short, we did meet and fall in love with this very energetic and very entertaining baby boy. We moved to Kenya and started the adoption process. Zooming over many, many details, we come to one crucial fact. We bumped into incompetent lawyers and a very corrupt judge. Strap in for an emotional drama. Scene 1. My wife and I are both in shock, rage, and disbelief as a judge tells us that we are guilty of such offenses that our baby boy would be taken away from us immediately and put into an unnamed orphanage. Scene 2, we are sitting in a court, hearing the third judge with his tie-breaking decision tell us that his decision is that Timothy should be brought back to us. Hearts literally do skip beats. Scene 3, the cliches are true. Time does slow down, as it did for us when we sobbed watching a little boy, whom we were not allowed to see for 6 months, get out of a car and eventually into our arms. Now for the Christmas part. A pastor told us to have faith that our son would be back at home for Christmas. Yeah, sure. However, a month later, Timothy in tow, we were stuck as all the buses from the capital Nairobi were booked for the Christmas rush. Amazingly, after a complete day of searching, the last 2 seats to the city of Mombasa were found, and we arrived home together on Christmas Eve. Christmas Day, we put tinsel on Timothy's head, hearts bursting with emotion. We welcomed guests, neighbors, co-workers, and everyone else who wanted to celebrate Timothy's return to us. The end.
My name is Allegra Friesen-Epp, and I graduated from Westgate in 2014. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about how my Christmas is going to look pretty different this year. It's certainly going to be a lot quieter, and maybe a bit lonely. I'm also feeling pretty disappointed that many of my Christmas traditions won't be able to happen as planned. You know, it was partway into the pandemic that I began to realize that these are some of the same things I was feeling 7 years ago. At the start of my grade 12 year at Westgate, I was diagnosed with cancer. That fall, I was only in class about half of the time. My energy levels were low from chemo, and I had dropped out of almost all of my extracurriculars and electives. My grad year had taken a radical turn. When Christmas came around, I was about halfway through treatment. And by this point, I had been doing a lot of putting one foot in front of the other. The future felt very unknown. I was living between one good scan and the next. I was also pretty lonely. Cancer had a way of isolating me from other people's normal lives. It was even impossible to plan ahead. My family had been hoping to spend Christmas in Texas with relatives, but we had to cancel our trip. When I was sick, I found the analogy of seasons to be quite helpful. See, my treatment began in the fall and was set to end in the spring. And so in the middle of winter, when I was too far into treatment to remember the beginning and too far away from the end to see the light, I tried to remind myself that something warmer and brighter was coming. There were better days ahead. Spring was on her way. Still, waiting for healing is hard. Waiting for spring in Winnipeg is hard. Waiting for a global pandemic to be eradicated is just plain hard. It turns out that Advent is also a season of waiting. And as you recall, the Christ child we wait for is all about hope and healing. We cannot control the length of cancer treatments, the timeline of the pandemic, or the thermometer in winter. But rest assured, God has promised to show up. And spring has never not come.
Hi, it's Kathy G. talking to you today. I work at Mennonite Church, Manitoba, and I'm glad to be part of your Christmas celebrations. This year has had so many losses, and we, as your supporting faith community, want you to know that our hearts have ached for you, realizing that as students and staff, you have had your losses and your disappointments and your suffering. And so together we have much actually to grieve, both as a school community and all the communities and families you're connected with, and across all of God's creation. We have been sorrowful. Today I hold lanterns of hope, light of hope, for all of us hoping for better days ahead. And that are, I think my hope for you as students is that the sorrow and the suffering you have experienced this year would somehow do its work in softening, continue to soften all of our hearts, make all of us more compassionate human beings. If our suffering does that in us, then that would be a good thing. And I also hope that this year you have experienced a deeper sense of God's presence with you. On this day too, we also want to acknowledge the loss of a former Westgate principal, Miss Gail Schellenberg. I knew Gail, enjoyed Gail, continue to be thankful for the impact she made on the Westgate community. So together we continue to give thanks to God for Ms. Schellenberg's ministry among us, and we ask for God's comfort to be with you as a school and with her beloved family. Know this, we give thanks to God for you. We really do. We're so glad you are part of the Westgate community, And we pray that amid all that has been darkness in these days, you would experience some glimmer of light, a glimmer of hope, the hope of Christ within us, among us, between us. And may that hope hold you tight in the light and the love of God. Be well.